"Do not fire unless they fire first," Admiral Marcus Hale ordered, and half the bridge stared at him in disbelief. Nobody expected restraint from the man who commanded the largest invasion fleet the Astran Dominion had assembled in over 2 centuries. 3,000 warships stretched across the darkness beyond Pluto, their formation so vast that navigation satellites on distant colonies reported it as a moving constellation. Every military analyst across the galaxy agreed on one thing: Earth would surrender before sunset. The live broadcast from the Galactic News Network called it the final expansion of civilization into an unpredictable corner of space. The commentators praised Hale's discipline, his flawless record, and the overwhelming force behind him. To them, this was not a war. It was paperwork waiting to be signed. Hale folded his hands behind his back and watched the pale blue planet slowly grow larger on the main display. "Signal the Terrans again," he said calmly. "Offer them one final opportunity to avoid unnecessary suffering." His communications officer nodded. "Transmission sent, sir." Seconds passed, then another minute. Finally, the reply arrived. The bridge became silent as everyone waited for Earth's answer. The officer frowned. "Sir, that's all they sent." Hale looked toward the screen. A single sentence appeared against a plain black background. "Welcome to the Sol System. Please follow designated navigation corridors." No threats, no demands, no plea for peace, just a traffic advisory. A few officers laughed. One actually shook his head. "They're treating us like tourists," someone muttered. Hale allowed himself the smallest smile. Fear makes people behave strangely. He turned back toward the tactical display. "Proceed." Hundreds of miles away, beneath the Rocky Mountains, the United Earth Defense Command looked nothing like a bunker preparing for humanity's last stand. Coffee machines hummed. Analysts quietly exchanged reports. Someone complained that the break room had run out of cream. Admiral Daniel Mercer stepped into the operations center carrying a ceramic mug instead of a stack of emergency orders. His gray jacket wasn't even buttoned. "Morning," he said, setting the cup beside the command table. Lieutenant Sarah Collins looked up from her station. "Sir, the invasion fleet crossed the outer marker 8 minutes ago." Mercer nodded once. "Any civilian traffic still inside the corridor?" "Last transport cleared 5 minutes ago." "Good." Another officer couldn't hide the concern in his voice. "Sir, should we begin mobilizing the 1st and 2nd fleets?" Mercer studied the holographic map for several quiet seconds before asking a question that seemed completely unrelated. "Did they stay inside the navigation lanes?" Collins blinked. "Yes, sir. Every one of them." Mercer gave a satisfied nod. "Excellent." The younger officers exchanged confused glances. They had spent years preparing for this exact moment. Simulations, war games, endless briefings. Yet their commanding officer showed less emotion than someone reviewing next week's weather forecast. Collins finally gathered the courage to ask what everyone else was thinking. "Sir, aren't you worried?" Mercer looked at the blue marble floating above the command table. His expression softened for only a heartbeat. "I worry about my people every day." He picked up his coffee and took a slow sip. "But today," he glanced toward the tactical display showing thousands of enemy ships pressing deeper into human space. "I'm more interested in whether they're following directions." Nobody understood the remark. Not the officers inside the bunker. Not Admiral Hale aboard his flagship. Not the billions watching across the galaxy. But somewhere beyond Neptune, hidden behind ordinary-looking navigation beacons that every Astran ship obediently used to stay in formation, something quietly came online for the first time in 23 years. Admiral Marcus Hale had conquered 12 star systems without losing a flagship, and experience had taught him that silence always meant one of two things. Either the enemy had accepted reality, or they were making a mistake they would regret. Looking at the tactical display, he believed Earth belonged in the first category. Every update arriving from reconnaissance drones reinforced that belief. Human orbital stations remained powered down. Defense platforms showed only routine maintenance signatures. Commercial traffic had disappeared exactly as instructed by the navigation advisory. Nothing about the Sol system resembled a civilization preparing for its final stand. Lieutenant Varick stepped beside Hale and lowered his voice. "Sir, long-range scans confirm no significant fleet movement from Mars, Luna, or the outer colonies." Hale nodded. "Their military command understands mathematics." Should we begin deploying occupation groups? Not yet. Hale folded his arms. Let them watch us arrive. Fear spreads faster than soldiers. Back beneath the Rocky Mountains, Admiral Daniel Mercer stood in front of an enormous digital map of the solar system. The room remained surprisingly quiet. Nobody shouted. Nobody ran between consoles. Operators spoke in calm voices while comparing numbers and verifying reports. It looked more like an engineering conference than the opening hours of an invasion. Sarah Collins watched the enemy formation slowly advance along the highlighted corridor. Sir, every Astron ship is staying inside the designated approach lane within less than 20 feet of projected alignment. Mercer smiled slightly. Remarkably disciplined. Commander Rebecca Turner glanced toward him. I still do not understand why we published those navigation routes ourselves. Mercer looked around the room before answering. Because people trust maps. A few officers exchanged puzzled looks. Mercer continued, especially when those maps appear to help them. Nobody asked another question. They all knew his reputation. Mercer never explained a decision before it became necessary. He believed information was like ammunition, useful only when released at the right moment. A notification appeared on Collins' screen. Sir, another diplomatic transmission from Admiral Hale. Mercer gestured toward the speakers. Hale's measured voice filled the operations center. To the government of Earth. The Astron Dominion recognizes your cooperation during our approach. Continue complying with our security procedures, and civilian infrastructure will remain protected. Resistance will only prolong the inevitable. The message ended. Someone near the back quietly muttered, "That is generous of him." A few restrained laughs spread across the room. Mercer picked up his coffee without looking away from the display. He believes we are cooperating. Turner crossed her arms. Are we? Mercer took another slow sip before answering. Every instruction we gave them was accurate. Collins looked confused. Sir, we told them exactly which corridors were safe. He paused. Safe for us. The room fell silent again. On the flagship Resolute horizon, Hale received another report. Sir, gravitational conditions remain unusually stable inside the navigation lanes. Outside the corridor, we continue detecting inconsistent sensor reflections. Hale barely looked up. Ignore them. Our science division recommends additional mapping before advancing farther. Hale shook his head. No civilization capable of resisting us would leave its defenses powered down this long. He turned toward the observation window where the distant glow of Earth reflected across polished metal. The Terrans have accepted what every younger species eventually accepts. History. Far beyond Neptune, unnoticed by every Astron sensor, one inactive beacon quietly changed color from blue to green. Then another followed. Then another. Across millions of miles, hundreds of ordinary navigation markers exchanged encrypted signals so weak they blended perfectly into the background radiation of space. Deep inside the command bunker, a soft chime echoed from Mercer's wrist display. He glanced down for less than a second before placing the device back on the table. Collins noticed the movement. Sir. Mercer looked toward the slowly advancing enemy fleet and answered with the same calm voice he had used all morning. Phase 1 is complete. They are exactly where we spent 23 years hoping they would choose to be. The first surprise arrived without alarms, explosions, or desperate calls for help. It came as paperwork. Admiral Marcus Hale studied a logistics report that should have made him smile. Instead, it made him pause. Every supply station marked on the invasion charts was exactly where Terran intelligence records said it would be. Every orbital warehouse was intact. Every communication relay answered automated identification requests. But every warehouse was empty. Every fuel depot had been cleaned out. Every maintenance dock had been shut down days before the Astron fleet crossed into the system. Lieutenant Varick frowned as another report appeared beside the first. Sir, civilian populations have already evacuated every location listed in our occupation schedule. Hale looked up. How long? Our analysts estimate they began relocating almost 3 weeks ago. Impossible. Varick hesitated. That was my first thought as well. Hale slowly walked toward the observation window. Earth floated peacefully ahead, wrapped in white clouds and blue oceans, looking almost untouched by the greatest invasion force in modern galactic history. If they knew we were coming, he said quietly, why did they not reinforce their defenses? Nobody answered. because no one had an answer that made sense. Back inside United Earth Defense Command, Sarah Collins watched dozens of green indicators appear one after another across the holographic map. Sector 12 confirmed. Another voice answered from across the room. Sector 14 confirmed. Then another. Outer beacon network synchronized. Mercer remained completely still, listening more than speaking. Commander Rebecca Turner finally broke the silence. They have started scanning every abandoned station. Mercer nodded. Good. Should we be concerned that they are beginning to notice? No, he glanced toward the giant display where thousands of enemy ships continued moving exactly where human navigation markers directed them. Curiosity is part of the plan. Collins looked over her shoulder. Sir. Mercer rested one hand on the edge of the command table. When people believe they are winning, they stop asking the important questions. Several younger officers quietly considered that. It sounded less like military doctrine and more like something learned over an entire lifetime. Far ahead of the main formation, Astron reconnaissance ships entered another navigation corridor. Their pilots reported perfect flight conditions, stable gravity, excellent visibility, no detectable mines, no hidden weapons. One pilot even joked over the communication channel. The humans paved the road for us. Laughter spread across the bridge of Hale's flagship. Even Hale allowed himself a small smile. Keep moving. Then another message arrived. Sir, we have identified 3 abandoned Terran fleet yards around Jupiter. Hale leaned forward. Empty. Completely empty. Construction records? Everything removed. Hale narrowed his eyes. No military leaves behind facilities in perfect condition unless they expect to use them again. Varric looked concerned. Should we investigate before advancing? Hale considered the question carefully. Every instinct he had developed through decades of command whispered that something about this campaign felt unusual. But every measurable fact still favored the Dominion. They possessed overwhelming numbers. Superior manufacturing. Better shielding. More experienced crews. Whatever Earth had planned could not possibly erase those advantages. Finally, he answered. Deploy survey teams. The main fleet continues forward. Hundreds of ships separated from the formation, each following identical navigation guidance provided by Earth itself. Deep beneath the mountains, another quiet tone sounded from Mercer's wrist display. Collins noticed him glance down again. Another confirmation? She asked. Mercer gave a slight nod. They just made the first decision we could not make for them. Turner folded her arms. Meaning? Mercer looked at the glowing web of green markers spreading across the solar system like invisible threads connecting one point to another. Every fleet believes it is choosing its own path. He allowed himself the faintest smile. That is usually the moment people stop realizing they are already inside someone else's plan. The order reached every Terran command center at exactly the same second. It contained only 6 words. Launch resolute. Maintain complete radio silence. No speeches followed. No countdown echoed through loudspeakers. Deep beneath the lunar shipyards, massive blast doors slowly rolled apart as a single warship emerged from its dock. It was not the newest vessel in Earth's fleet. It was not the largest. It carried no ceremonial markings, no victory banners, and no polished hull meant to impress foreign observers. The gray plating showed years of careful maintenance instead of fresh paint. To anyone watching from outside, it looked almost disappointingly ordinary. Colonel Nathan Brooks stood on the bridge with both hands resting behind his back. He watched the docking clamps release through the forward display without saying a word. Beside him, Executive Officer Emily Carter quietly checked the final systems report. Navigation is green. Reactor output is steady. All departments report ready. Brooks nodded once. Cast off. The ship drifted forward so smoothly that nobody on the bridge felt the moment it left the station. Carter looked toward him. No escort. No escort. No fighter screen. No, she smiled faintly. They're going to think we have lost our minds. Brooks looked through the main viewport, where distant stars reflected across the dark hull. That assumption has served us well before. Thousands of miles away, Astron surveillance arrays immediately detected the launch. Lieutenant Varric walked briskly onto Admiral Hale's bridge carrying a fresh report. Sir, one human military vessel has departed Luna. Hale barely looked up from the tactical display. Classification: heavy cruiser by the profile. Registry identifies it as Resolute. Hale waited for the rest of the report. None came. That is all. Yes, sir. Several officers quietly laughed. One tactical specialist leaned back in his chair. Perhaps they are sending representatives to negotiate. Another replied, or surrender. Hale raised one hand, ending the conversation. Track the vessel. Do not engage unless it interferes with fleet operations. Understood. On the Galactic News Network, commentators quickly shifted their attention toward the lone human ship. Animated fleet diagrams appeared beside smiling analysts. One retired admiral confidently predicted the vessel would deliver diplomatic officials. Another suggested it might be carrying Earth's formal terms of surrender. Across dozens of worlds, billions watched the tiny gray icon move away from Luna while the enormous Astron fleet continued advancing. Nobody considered the possibility that the single ship mattered. Inside United Earth Defense Command, nobody celebrated its launch either. Sarah Collins monitored the growing stream of telemetry arriving from hundreds of hidden sensors scattered throughout the solar system. Resolute has entered Corridor 7. Mercer looked at the display. Velocity, holding exactly as planned. Enemy reaction? Minimal. Mercer quietly nodded. Good. Commander Rebecca Turner studied the projected flight path. Nathan is making himself look insignificant. Exactly. Turner crossed her arms. He does not even look like he is trying to intercept them. Mercer allowed himself a slight smile. Because he is not. Collins glanced toward him again. Then what is he doing? Mercer answered without taking his eyes off the tactical map. He is giving them something comfortable to watch. Hours passed. Resolute maintained the same steady course without changing speed, broadcasting nothing except the legally required civilian navigation beacon used by every vessel entering controlled traffic lanes. It neither accelerated nor maneuvered toward the invasion fleet. To every Astron observer, the human cruiser behaved with almost boring predictability. Admiral Hale eventually stopped asking for updates. The lonely gray ship had become background noise compared to the movement of thousands of Dominion warships spreading across the outer solar system. Yet hidden among ordinary navigation beacons, tiny encrypted acknowledgments continued flashing from one silent station to the next. As Resolute crossed each invisible checkpoint, another dormant system quietly awakened, another calculation completed, another piece of a design that had taken 23 years to build moved one step closer to becoming irreversible. Brooks finally broke the silence on his bridge. Checkpoint 9 confirmed. Emily Carter looked down at her console before meeting his eyes. Confirmed. Brooks gave a single nod. Then they have stopped watching us. He looked ahead into the darkness with the calm expression of someone who had spent years preparing for this exact moment. Now the real mission begins. The first warning was so small that no one on Admiral Marcus Hale's bridge considered it worth mentioning. A navigation officer quietly cleared a yellow notification from his console after assuming it was another harmless sensor fluctuation. 5 minutes later, the same notification returned. Then it appeared on 3 more ships. Lieutenant Varick studied the incoming diagnostics with growing curiosity. Sir, several reconnaissance vessels are reporting slight differences in positional data. Hill did not seem concerned. How slight? Between 12 and 18 inches, depending on the vessel. One engineer chuckled. That is well inside acceptable tolerance. Hale agreed. Correct the drift and continue. Orders spread through the fleet. Tiny course adjustments rippled across thousands of ships, each captain trusting the Dominion's navigation computers without hesitation. The corrections looked routine. They felt routine. Nobody realized that every adjustment moved them exactly where the hidden human guidance network wanted them to go. Aboard Resolute, Colonel Nathan Brooks quietly watched dozens of green symbols slide across his tactical display. Emily Carter compared the incoming data against a chart that looked more like an engineering blueprint than a battlefield. Group Alpha accepted the correction. Brooks nodded. Group Beta? 32 seconds behind schedule. Brooks smiled slightly. They always were more cautious. Carter looked at him. Do you ever think about how strange this would sound to someone outside this room? Brooks folded his arms. If the plan needs explaining, then it probably failed. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, Admiral Daniel Mercer walked through the operations center, carrying a fresh cup of coffee, as though he had all the time in the world. Sarah Collins met him beside the central display. Sir, every Astron formation has begun making autonomous navigation corrections. Mercer stopped beside the holographic map. Hundreds of blue icons shifted almost imperceptibly across invisible lines only human operators could see. Excellent. Collins looked puzzled. They believe they are fixing errors. They are. Mercer took another sip. Just not the errors they think. Commander Rebecca Turner looked up from her station. The predictive model is now matching actual fleet movement within less than 6 inches. Mercer quietly nodded. 23 years of simulations had finally become reality. Meanwhile, on worlds far beyond the Sol system, military analysts continued discussing the invasion with complete confidence. One famous strategist laughed during a live interview. Humanity is demonstrating textbook psychological surrender. They abandoned military infrastructure, evacuated population centers, and launched only one cruiser. Their government understands resistance would be irrational. Millions agreed. Market prices stabilized. Trade routes reopened. Insurance companies even lowered wartime risk estimates. Nobody believed the outcome could still change. On Hale's flagship, another report arrived. Sir, communications latency between detached survey groups has increased by 0.3 seconds. Hale looked up. Interference? None detected. Hardware failure? Negative. Hale frowned for only a moment before dismissing it. Continue monitoring. The Dominion's communication network had survived far worse during previous campaigns. Tiny delays meant nothing, or at least they had never meant anything before. Aboard Resolute, Carter suddenly looked toward Brooks. Checkpoint 14 completed. Brooks slowly walked toward the forward viewport. Somewhere ahead, invisible to ordinary sensors, ordinary navigation beacons continued exchanging microscopic bursts of encrypted timing data. Nothing flashed. Nothing exploded. The entire battlefield remained perfectly calm. That was exactly how human engineers had designed it. Brooks quietly asked, "Synchronization?" Carter looked down at her console before answering. 99.7%. Brooks nodded once. Close enough. Carter hesitated before speaking again. Do you think Admiral Hale has noticed? Brooks watched the distant stars drift across the glass. He has noticed the symptoms. His expression never changed. He just has not realized he is looking at the disease. Hundreds of millions of miles away, another Astron captain ordered a routine course correction without a second thought. The adjustment lasted less than 2 seconds. It seemed completely insignificant. Yet inside United Earth Defense Command, one small indicator changed from yellow to green, and every officer in the room instinctively looked toward Admiral Mercer. He quietly set his coffee on the command table and said the words everyone had been waiting more than 2 decades to hear. The corridor is closed. From this point forward, every choice they make belongs to us. For the first time since entering the Sol system, Admiral Marcus Hale canceled his evening briefing. The decision surprised everyone on the flagship. Hale never skipped routine meetings. Predictability had been the foundation of every successful campaign he had ever commanded. Yet something about the latest reports refused to fit together. Ships were exactly where they were supposed to be, but fuel consumption across multiple formations was running slightly higher than projected. Communication delays remained minor, but they kept increasing in tiny, almost invisible steps. Navigation systems insisted everything was operating within normal limits, while experienced captains quietly admitted that something simply felt different. Hale stood alone in the strategy room studying a 3-dimensional map of the solar system. Lieutenant Varick entered carrying another tablet. Sir, engineering completed a full diagnostic. Hale did not turn around. And every system passed inspection. Navigation? Perfect. Communications? Nominal. Hale finally looked back at him. Then explain why veteran captains keep telling me they feel lost. Varick hesitated. I cannot, sir. Hale accepted the answer without criticism. Sometimes an honest uncertainty was more valuable than false confidence. Several light hours away, Resolute continued drifting along its quiet course. Colonel Nathan Brooks walked through the ship without urgency, stopping occasionally to greet crew members by name. There were no speeches about courage. No dramatic announcements. Most of the sailors looked almost bored. Some played cards during scheduled downtime. Others argued over baseball scores from archived broadcasts that had been downloaded before departure. Emily Carter caught Brooks smiling as 2 mechanics debated whether a pitcher from 50 years earlier could survive in modern Major League Baseball. You plan that too? She asked. Brooks raised an eyebrow. Plan what? Keeping everyone this relaxed. Brooks shrugged. People perform better when they remember what they are protecting. Carter quietly nodded. Outside the hull, the stars remained perfectly still. Inside the ship, nobody looked like they were participating in the most important operation in human history. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, Admiral Daniel Mercer finally gathered his senior officers around the central command table. The room became completely silent. Mercer rarely explained long-term strategy, but everyone sensed that the moment had arrived. He placed one finger on the holographic map. 23 years ago, he began, we accepted a simple fact. Every civilization stronger than us expected us to build bigger ships. Nobody interrupted him. We could not outbuild them. We could not outnumber them. We could not outspend them. He paused for a moment. So we stopped trying. Sarah Collins looked at the web of glowing navigation beacons covering the solar system. Mercer continued, instead of building a larger navy, we rebuilt the battlefield. Commander Rebecca Turner slowly smiled as the idea settled into place. We never fortified Earth. Mercer shook his head. No, he touched another point on the map. We fortified every decision an invading fleet would make before it ever reached Earth. Collins looked back toward the display showing thousands of Astran ships. They think they are navigating through our territory. Mercer answered quietly. They have been navigating through our system since the moment they crossed the outer marker. At that exact hour, Admiral Hale ordered one final precaution. Dispatch an independent scout beyond the designated navigation corridor. The bridge became silent. It was the first direct deviation from Earth's published approach lanes since the invasion had begun. Minutes later, the scout acknowledged the order and slowly adjusted its heading. On Resolute, a soft tone echoed through the bridge. Emily Carter looked down at her console, then toward Brooks. One vessel has left the corridor. Brooks asked only one question. Voluntarily. Yes. Brooks gave a slow nod before looking out into the darkness again. Then they finally asked the right question. Carter waited. Should we stop them? Brooks answered with complete confidence. No. A faint green light appeared beside the scout's identifier on his display. Now they get to discover why nobody else ever did. The scout crossed the edge of the designated corridor at exactly 9:17 Earth Standard Time. Nothing happened. Its engines continued humming at normal output. Long-range scanners reported empty space in every direction. Lieutenant Varick watched the telemetry with quiet satisfaction. Sir, the vessel reports no mines, no weapons platforms, and no hidden fleet. Admiral Marcus Hale folded his arms. Continue another 500 miles. The bridge relaxed. Several officers exchanged relieved smiles. Whatever mystery surrounded the human navigation lanes, it appeared to be nothing more than excessive caution. Then the scout transmitted another routine update. Position verified. A second later, the message repeated by itself. Then it repeated again with a different timestamp. Varick frowned. Communications, explained the duplicate packets. Working on it, sir. The operator checked every relay. There is no malfunction. More reports arrived. The scout insisted it had traveled another 60 miles. External tracking insisted it had barely moved at all. Star positions remained correct. Velocity remained correct. Fuel consumption remained correct. Yet every navigation system aboard the vessel disagreed with every external observation. Hill's expression slowly changed. It was not fear. It was something rarer. Doubt. Recall the scout, he ordered. The communications officer transmitted the command immediately. Seconds later, the response came back. Sir, they are attempting to comply. Varick looked confused. Attempting? Their helm reports they have already turned around. Every eye shifted toward the tactical display. The scout continued drifting farther away from the fleet. On board the small vessel, Captain Elias Dorn stared at his navigation console. The digital compass insisted the ship was flying directly back toward the Dominion formation. The stars outside the viewport insisted exactly the opposite. Reset the inertial reference. Already done, Captain. Use manual navigation. Manual agrees with the computer. Dorn took a slow breath. Then somebody explain why the fleet keeps getting smaller through the window. Nobody could. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, a quiet chime echoed through United Earth Defense Command. Sarah Collins watched one blue icon separate from the massive invasion force. The scout has entered Phase 3. Admiral Daniel Mercer remained calm. Has the Dominion changed formation? Negative. Good. Commander Rebecca Turner looked at the isolated vessel. Do we intervene? Mercer shook his head. No, why not? Mercer rested both hands on the command table. Because they still believe the problem belongs to one ship. Collins understood before anyone else did. And by the time they realize it belongs to all of them, Mercer finished her sentence. They will already be committed. Aboard Resolute, Colonel Nathan Brooks quietly observed the same telemetry. Emily Carter looked toward him. The scout is requesting navigation assistance on open frequencies. Brooks remained silent. Sir, he finally answered. If we help them now, they will retreat. Carter nodded slowly. And if they retreat? Brooks looked toward the thousands of Dominion ships still following the carefully prepared approach lanes. Then 23 years of preparation become another forgotten contingency plan. Carter looked back at the display where the isolated scout continued making perfect corrections that carried it farther from safety with every passing minute. It must be terrifying. Brooks answered softly. Imagine believing every instrument is working while reality quietly disagrees. Back on Hale's flagship, the bridge had grown unusually quiet. The laughter from earlier had disappeared. Engineers searched for mechanical failures. Scientists recalculated gravitational models. Communications officers checked every relay 3 separate times. Every system insisted it was functioning exactly as designed. Hale slowly approached the tactical display and studied the glowing web of human navigation corridors stretching across the solar system. For the first time since arriving, he stopped seeing them as simple traffic lanes. He looked at them the way an experienced commander looks at defensive walls, minefields, or fortified mountain passes. Very quietly, almost to himself, he said, those were never directions. Lieutenant Varick looked toward him. Sir. Hale kept staring at the map. They were architecture. Admiral Marcus Hale had spent his entire career believing that every battlefield could eventually be understood. Every defense had a weakness. Every trap had an exit. Every opponent made mistakes under pressure. Yet as he stared at the glowing web surrounding the Sol system, he could no longer identify where the battlefield actually ended. Recall every detached survey group, he ordered. Return all formations to primary alignment. The bridge answered immediately. Orders transmitted. For several long seconds, everything appeared normal. Then confirmations began arriving from across the fleet. Task Group 7 acknowledges. Task Group 11 changing course. Survey Wing 4 returning. Hale watched the tactical display with cautious optimism. Then the first formation failed to arrive where it should have. A second group drifted several hundred miles from its projected position despite reporting a perfect maneuver. Another group insisted they had regrouped successfully, yet long-range tracking showed them scattered across completely different sectors. Lieutenant Varick swallowed hard. Sir, every captain believes they followed your orders exactly. Hale looked at the display without blinking. And they did not. No, sir. Then stop asking where our ships are. He leaned closer to the holographic map. Find out which reference they are trusting. Across the bridge, silence replaced confidence. Nobody had considered that navigation itself might have become the battlefield. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, United Earth Defense Command remained almost unervingly calm. Sarah Collins quietly compared the latest Dominion fleet movements against projections created decades earlier. One by one, the blue icons settled almost exactly where human analysts expected them to be. Prediction accuracy has reached 99.9%, she said softly. Commander Rebecca Turner smiled in disbelief. 23 years, Collins nodded. Every simulation. Admiral Daniel Mercer looked around the room. No cheering. No celebration. Just quiet professionals watching years of patient work unfold exactly as designed. Status of Resolute. Mercer asked. Holding position. Enemy attention? Minimal. Most Dominion commanders are focused on restoring fleet alignment. Mercer nodded once. Nathan bought us the time we needed. Aboard Resolute, Colonel Nathan Brooks stood beside the forward viewport as distant Dominion formations slowly shifted across the darkness. Emily Carter walked over carrying fresh sensor reports. They are trying to rebuild their original formation. Brooks glanced at the numbers before handing them back. They cannot. Because they no longer share the same frame of reference? Brooks smiled faintly. Exactly. Carter looked through the glass toward the enormous fleet. They still have every ship. Yes. Every weapon. Yes. Every advantage. Brooks quietly shook his head. No, Carter looked at him. Brooks spoke almost as though he were teaching an old lesson. A fleet is not dangerous because of its ships. It is dangerous because every ship believes the same map. Several light hours away, Admiral Hale finally received the report he had been dreading. Sir, Fleet Group 9 is requesting independent navigation authority. Another followed almost immediately. Fleet Group 12 no longer trusts central guidance. Then another. Survey Command recommends separating operations until positional certainty can be restored. Hale slowly closed his eyes. No shouting. No panic. Just something far worse. His commanders had begun trusting their own local observations more than the fleet itself. The Dominion remained disciplined, but its shared confidence was quietly breaking apart. Hale opened his eyes and looked once more toward the distant blue world hanging peacefully against the stars. They never planned to destroy us, he said. Lieutenant Varick looked over. Sir. Hale spoke with the calm voice of a commander finally understanding his opponent. They planned to make us stop functioning as one fleet. At that exact moment, Resolute gently rotated toward open space. Its engines brightened for only a few seconds before settling into a steady burn. To every Dominion observer, it looked like a single human cruiser quietly leaving the area. Hardly anyone paid attention. Inside United Earth Defense Command, however, one small indicator changed from green to gold. Sarah Collins smiled for the first time all day. Resolute is coming home. Mercer picked up his untouched coffee, now completely cold, and looked at the tactical display where thousands of enemy ships remained trapped by nothing more than their own certainty. Good, he said softly. Now let the galaxy decide what story they think just happened. When Resolute crossed back into lunar space, there was no victory parade waiting, no cheering crowds, and no triumphant broadcast. The ship slipped quietly into the same dock it had departed days earlier, almost unnoticed except by the technicians who connected fuel lines and maintenance cables, as if it were any ordinary patrol returning from a routine assignment. Colonel Nathan Brooks stepped onto the station wearing the same plain uniform he had left in. A young maintenance worker recognized him and smiled. Long trip, Colonel. Brooks smiled back. Long enough. Then he kept walking. Inside United Earth Defense Command, the massive tactical display slowly faded from bright blue to a calm neutral gray. Thousands of Astron ships remained intact, yet they had stopped advancing. Their commanders spent every hour trying to rebuild a common picture of where they actually were before making another decision. Every delay created another delay. Every verification required another confirmation. The largest invasion fleet ever assembled had become trapped not by walls or weapons, but by uncertainty. Sarah Collins leaned back in her chair and finally let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding. It is over, is it not? Admiral Daniel Mercer looked at the display for a long moment before answering. The operation is. He reached over and powered down the holographic table with one quiet touch. The lesson is just beginning. 2 weeks later, representatives from dozens of civilizations gathered before the Galactic Council, expecting an explanation for why the Dominion had suddenly suspended its campaign. Admiral Marcus Hale stood before them looking older than he had only days earlier. There were no visible wounds, no signs of defeat, just the expression of a man who had learned something expensive. One council member finally asked the question everyone had been waiting to hear. How many human warships opposed your fleet? Hale answered without hesitation. 1. Quiet whispers filled the chamber. Another delegate frowned. Surely you mean one task force. Hale slowly shook his head. No. One ship. A third delegate looked genuinely confused. Then how did they stop 3,000 vessels? Hale looked around the room before speaking again. Because we spent our entire history believing power was measured by what an enemy could build. He paused. Humanity measured power by what an enemy would choose. The room became silent. Hale continued. They did not defeat our fleet. They understood it. Back on Earth, Mercer stood outside the command bunker just before sunrise. After weeks underground, the cool mountain air felt unfamiliar. Brooks walked over carrying 2 paper cups of coffee from a small roadside diner a few miles away. He handed one to Mercer. I figured the coffee in the bunker had finally lost the argument. Mercer laughed quietly. You figured correctly. They stood together watching the first light spread across the mountains. After a while, Brooks asked, Do you think they will come back? Mercer looked toward the horizon before answering. Someday. Brooks nodded. Should we keep building more ships? Mercer smiled into the morning light. Of course. Then he shook his head. But never forget that ships are only tools. Brooks waited. Mercer took one slow sip of coffee before finishing the thought that had guided humanity for more than 2 decades. The strongest defense is understanding how someone else thinks before they do. Years later, cadets across Earth studied the operation in military academies, but the final page of every textbook contained no diagrams, no equations, and no tactical maps. It carried only one sentence from Admiral Daniel Mercer. It read, "If someone believes your greatest strength is the size of your fist, they will never notice the hand quietly moving the chessboard." And somewhere beyond the edge of human space, experienced captains began passing a different lesson to every new officer before their first command. Never mistake calm for weakness. Never confuse patience with surrender. Because the most dangerous civilization in the galaxy was never the one that shouted the loudest. It was the one that had already finished thinking while everyone else was still counting ships.